The morning air in Asheville, North Carolina, carried the kind of chill that made people reach for an extra sweater, even though the calendar insisted spring had arrived weeks ago. The Appalachian foothills surrounding the small mountain town still held patches of fog that would burn off by noon, revealing dense forests of oak and pine that stretched for miles in every direction. It was the kind of landscape that could swallow a person whole if they weren't careful, and everyone who lived there understood that unspoken truth. Rachel Morrison stood at her kitchen window, watching her 8-year-old son Ethan in the backyard. He sat cross-legged on the grass, his hands moving in repetitive patterns as he arranged pine cones in a precise line. Beside him, their 2-year-old border collie, Scout, lay in her characteristic crouch position, her black and white head resting on her paws, amber eyes fixed on the boy with unwavering attention. The dog had been with them for 18 months, and Rachel had never seen an animal so attuned to another living being. Ethan had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when he was 3. The diagnosis itself hadn't been a shock. Rachel and her husband Daniel had known something was different about their son, long before any doctor put a name to it. What had been difficult was navigating the world that followed, the therapies, the school meetings, the constant worry about Ethan's safety. He was nonverbal, communicating through gestures and occasional words that emerged when he felt comfortable. But more challenging than his communication difficulties was his tendency to wander. The clinical term was elopement, but to Rachel, it was simply the thing that kept her awake at night, checking locks, imagining worst-case scenarios. Before I continue, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It helps more than you know, and I love connecting with viewers from all over. Now, let's get back to Ethan and Scout. Scout had changed everything. Daniel, who worked as a park ranger in the Pisgah National Forest, had brought the dog home as a puppy from a colleague whose border collie had an unexpected litter. "She's from working stock," Daniel had explained, cradling the tiny black and white bundle. "Her mother herds sheep up in Madison County. These dogs are bred to be aware, to anticipate, to protect." Rachel had been skeptical at first. They barely had time to manage Ethan's needs, let alone train a puppy. But within weeks, Scout had proven herself to be something extraordinary. The dog seemed to understand Ethan in a way that transcended normal pet-owner relationships. When the boy became overwhelmed, Scout would place herself between Ethan and whatever was causing his distress. When he stimmed, rocking back and forth or flapping his hands, Scout would sit beside him, not interrupting, just present. And most remarkably, when Ethan began to drift toward doors or gates, Scout would position herself in his path, gently but firmly redirecting him. Rachel dried her hands on a dish towel and glanced at the clock. It was nearly 9 in the morning, and she needed to get Ethan ready for his therapy appointment at 11. She opened the back door and called out, "Ethan, sweetie, time to come inside." The boy didn't look up, still absorbed in his pine cone arrangement. Scout's ears perked up, and she rose to her feet, moving to Ethan and nudging his shoulder with her nose. It was their routine. Scout helped transition Ethan from one activity to another, making the process smoother for everyone. Daniel emerged from the hallway, already dressed in his ranger uniform. "I've got to head out early," he said, kissing Rachel on the cheek. "We've got a group of hikers missing their permits up near Looking Glass Rock, and I need to check on them before the weather turns." He knelt down as Ethan came through the door, Scout at his heels. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said softly, not expecting a response but always trying. Ethan's eyes briefly met his father's before sliding away, his attention already captured by the refrigerator magnets. "Be careful out there," Rachel said, and Daniel nodded, the unspoken understanding between them heavy in the air. His job required him to search for lost people regularly, and they both carried the irony of that. He found strangers in the wilderness while they worked every day to keep their own son safe. The morning passed in its familiar rhythm. Rachel helped Ethan get dressed, a process that required patience as certain textures bothered him, and tags had to be carefully cut from every garment. She made his breakfast, the same meal he ate every morning, scrambled eggs with cheese and toast cut into perfect squares. Scout remained close throughout, her presence calming. By 10:30, they were in the car, heading toward Asheville proper, where Ethan's occupational therapist had her office. The appointment went well. Ethan engaged with the sensory activities, and his therapist, Margaret, a woman in her 50s with decades of experience, was pleased with his progress. "He's really developing his fine motor skills," she told Rachel. "And I've noticed he's more regulated lately. Less anxious." "I think Scout has helped with that," Rachel admitted. "She seems to ground him somehow." Margaret smiled. "Animals have a way of doing that. They don't judge, they don't have expectations. They just are. For a child like Ethan, that consistency is invaluable." They returned home just after 1 in the afternoon. Rachel made lunch while Ethan played with his tablet, Scout lying beneath the kitchen table, always within touching distance of the boy. Rachel's phone buzzed, a text from her sister in Charlotte asking about Easter plans. She replied while stirring soup on the stove, distracted by the mundane details of life. It was perhaps 3 minutes, maybe 4, that she wasn't actively watching Ethan. The back door, she would later remember with crushing guilt, hadn't latched properly after Daniel left that morning. It had a tendency to stick, requiring an extra push to close completely. She'd meant to mention it to him. She'd meant to check it herself. When Rachel turned around, Ethan was gone. The tablet sat abandoned on the table, and the back door stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. "Ethan!" she called, trying to keep the panic from her voice. She rushed to the door, scanning the backyard. Empty. "Ethan!" Her voice rose, sharp with fear. She ran outside, checking the sides of the house, the front yard. The gate that led to the street was closed and latched, thank God, but the gate leading to the woods behind their property stood open. Her heart stopped. They lived on the edge of a residential area that quickly gave way to national forest land. Beyond their backyard was thousands of acres of wilderness, crisscrossed with hiking trails but mostly untouched, wild. People got lost in those woods. Experienced hikers got lost in those woods. Rachel's hands shook as she dialed Daniel's number. He answered on the second ring. "Ethan's gone," she said, her voice breaking. "He went out the back door. The woods, Daniel. He went into the woods." "I'm 20 minutes away," Daniel said immediately, and she could hear the sound of his truck door slamming, the engine starting. "Call 911, right now. Rachel, don't wait." She did, her words tumbling over each other as she explained to the dispatcher. "An 8-year-old boy, autistic, nonverbal, doesn't respond to his name, wearing a blue shirt and jeans. Missing for maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. Headed into the Pisgah National Forest." "Ma'am, how long has he been gone?" the dispatcher asked, and Rachel realized with horror that she didn't know exactly. 5 minutes? 10? How long had she been on her phone? "I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe 15 minutes, maybe more. We're sending units now. Stay at your house in case he comes back. Do not go into the woods alone." But Rachel was already moving toward the tree line, calling Ethan's name, knowing it was probably useless, but unable to stop herself. That's when she realized Scout was gone too. The dog had been under the table when Rachel started making lunch. Now she was nowhere to be seen. Rachel's chest tightened. Had Scout followed Ethan into the woods? The dog never left his side voluntarily. Of course she'd followed him. The realization brought both relief and deeper terror. At least Ethan wasn't alone, but now both of them were lost in the wilderness. Neighbors emerged as word spread. Small-town networks activated quickly. Mrs. Chen from next door, retired and sharp-eyed, came over immediately. "I'll stay at your house in case he circles back," she said firmly. "You go with your husband when he gets here. More eyes searching is better." Daniel arrived in 12 minutes, his Ranger truck skidding slightly as he pulled into the driveway. His face was pale, but set with determination. "Show me exactly where he went in," he said, and Rachel led him to the open gate. They could see the trail. Barely a trail, really, just a gap between trees where deer sometimes passed through that led into the forest. "Scouts with him," Rachel said, and Daniel nodded, understanding immediately what that meant. "That's good. That's really good. Border collies don't spook easily, and she won't leave him." He pulled a GPS unit from his belt and marked their location. "Search and rescue is mobilizing. They'll be here within the hour. But we can't wait. Every minute matters." They plunged into the woods, calling Ethan's name, though both knew he likely wouldn't respond even if he heard them. The forest was dense with early spring growth, mountain laurel and rhododendron creating thick walls of vegetation. The ground was still soft from recent rain, and Daniel examined it carefully, looking for small footprints. "Here," he said, pointing. A partial print from a child's sneaker, heading deeper into the woods, away from the house and the nearest trail. "He's moving fast." They followed, Daniel reading signs that Rachel couldn't see, a broken twig, a disturbed patch of leaves. Other searchers began arriving. Daniel's ranger colleagues, local police, volunteers from the community. Within an hour, there were 30 people in the woods, spreading out in a coordinated search pattern. A helicopter was requested from Buncombe County's emergency services. Rachel's mind spiraled through terrifying possibilities. Ethan was afraid of loud noises. What would he do if he heard the helicopter? Would he hide? The temperature was supposed to drop into the 40s tonight. He had no jacket. There were black bears in these mountains, usually not aggressive but unpredictable if surprised. And the terrain, rocky drop-offs, fast-moving streams swollen with snowmelt, countless places where a child could fall and be hurt. "He's been missing for 3 hours," a police officer told Daniel as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "We need to prepare for a night search." Rachel felt her legs give way, and Daniel caught her, holding her up. "We'll find him," he said, but she could hear the fear beneath his determination. As darkness approached, the search took on an urgency that bordered on desperation. Floodlights were brought in. Search dogs arrived, German shepherds trained in tracking, their handlers grim-faced and professional. They gave the dogs Ethan's scent from a shirt, and the animals surged forward, noses to the ground. But the dogs seemed confused, circling back on themselves, unable to pick up a clear trail. "The rain we had this morning is making it harder," one handler explained. "It dampens the scent." Rachel stood at the command post that had been established in their backyard, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, watching the lights moving through the trees like fireflies. Somewhere out there, her son was alone in the dark, confused, probably terrified. And Scout was with him, she reminded herself. Scout was with him. Night fell completely, and the temperature dropped as predicted. Rachel refused to go inside. Despite the cold, despite the exhaustion that made her sway on her feet, Daniel stayed with the search teams, his knowledge of the forest invaluable as they navigated the darkness. Hours blurred together. Midnight came and went. Rachel's phone rang constantly. Family, friends, people from Ethan's school offering prayers and help. At 2 a.m, the sheriff approached her, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Morrison, we're continuing the search, but I need you to understand the situation. Your son has been missing for over 12 hours. The temperature is 38 degrees. A child his size without proper clothing in these conditions." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "He's alive," Rachel said fiercely. "He's alive, and Scout is keeping him warm." She didn't know if she believed it, but she had to say it, had to make it true through sheer force of will. Daniel came back to the house at 4 in the morning, his face haggard, his uniform torn from branches. "We've covered every trail within a 3-mile radius," he said, his voice hoarse from calling Ethan's name. "We're expanding the search area at first light." "He could be 5 miles away by now," Rachel whispered. "Or more." "Border collies are territorial," Daniel said, grasping at hope. "Scout wouldn't lead him too far from what she knows. She'd try to bring him home." But what if she couldn't? What if Ethan had run too fast, too far, driven by whatever impulse had seized him? What if he'd fallen, hurt himself? What if Scout was sitting beside his body somewhere, guarding him the way she always did, unable to save him from the cold? Dawn broke gray and cold, with low clouds obscuring the mountain peaks. The search resumed with renewed intensity, fresh volunteers arriving to replace those who'd been searching all night. News vans appeared, reporters asking for statements, for photos of Ethan. Rachel provided a recent school picture, Ethan's face serious, his eyes looking just past the camera, Scout's head visible at the bottom of the frame because the dog had refused to leave his side even for pictures. The story spread quickly. Autistic boy, lost in national forest. Border collie missing with him. The headlines felt surreal, as if they were talking about someone else's tragedy, not her life falling apart. By noon on the second day, Rachel had stopped crying. She'd moved beyond tears into a numb fog where nothing felt real. She stood in the woods, miles from home now, with a search team that included a volunteer firefighter and 2 college students from UNC Asheville who'd seen the news and driven up to help. They moved slowly through a ravine, checking behind every boulder, under every fallen log. "Mrs. Morrison," the firefighter said gently, "maybe you should go back to the command post. Rest for a bit. We'll keep searching." "I can't," Rachel said. "I can't stop." They continued on, the forest pressing in from all sides, indifferent to their human tragedy. Birds sang, completely unaware that a little boy was lost among them. The normalcy of it felt obscene. Then faintly, carried on the wind, a sound, a bark. High-pitched, insistent. Everyone froze. "Did you hear that?" the firefighter asked, and they all nodded. Another bark, then another, coming from the north. "That's Scout," Rachel breathed. "That's her bark, I know it." They ran, crashing through underbrush, following the sound. Rachel's radio crackled as she contacted Daniel. "We hear a dog barking north side of Bent Creek near the old logging road." "We're coming," Daniel's voice crackled back. "Don't approach alone. There might be wildlife." But Rachel was already running, following the barking that grew louder with each step. They burst through a stand of hemlock trees into a small clearing, and there, Scout stood on a fallen log, barking frantically, her tail moving in agitated sweeps. Below the log, partially hidden by rhododendron bushes, a small figure huddled. "Ethan!" Rachel screamed, scrambling down the embankment. The boy was curled in a ball, his lips blue with cold, his clothes muddy and torn. But his eyes opened when he heard his mother's voice, and a small sound escaped him. Not a word, but something, a whimper of recognition. Scout leapt down from the log and pressed herself against Ethan's side, licking his face, her whole body trembling. Rachel reached them and gathered her son into her arms, sobbing now, feeling his cold skin, his small frame shaking with hypothermia. Oh God, I've got you, baby, I've got you." The firefighter was already radioing for medical support, calling in their location. Other searchers crashed through the woods toward them, Daniel's voice rising above the rest. "Rachel! Rachel!" "Here," she called. "We found him! He's alive!" Daniel appeared, His face transformed with relief, so profound it was almost painful. He dropped to his knees beside Rachel and Ethan, his hands gentle as he checked his son for injuries. "He's hypothermic," he said, pulling off his own jacket to wrap around the boy. "But he's breathing. He's conscious. Ethan, buddy, can you hear me?" Ethan's eyes, usually so hard to read, were glazed with cold and exhaustion, but they focused on his father's face for a long moment. His hand, trembling, reached out, not to Daniel or Rachel, but to Scout, fingers tangling in the dog's fur. Scout pressed closer, and Daniel noticed what Rachel, in her overwhelming relief, hadn't yet seen. The dog was lying partially across Ethan, her body positioned to shield him from the wind. And the ground around them, beneath the rhododendron where they'd taken shelter, showed signs of being deliberately cleared. Branches pulled away, leaves pushed into a pile that Ethan must have used as bedding. "She kept him warm," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "She stayed with him and kept him warm." Paramedics arrived within 15 minutes, hiking in with a stretcher and warming blankets. They worked efficiently, checking Ethan's vital signs, starting an IV. "His core temperature is 89 degrees, one of them reported. "That's severe hypothermia, but he's responsive. We need to get him to the hospital now." As they prepared to move Ethan, Scout refused to leave his side. When one of the paramedics tried to gently push the dog away, Scout planted her feet and growled, the first time Rachel had ever heard her make an aggressive sound. "It's okay," Rachel told the paramedic. "She can ride with us." They made their way back through the forest, a procession of searchers and emergency personnel. The helicopter that had been brought in landed in a nearby clearing, its rotors beating the air. Ethan whimpered at the noise, and Scout pressed against him, her presence calming him even in his confused, hypothermic state. At the hospital, doctors swarmed around Ethan, warming him gradually, checking for frostbite and other injuries. Miraculously, aside from the hypothermia, scratches, and bruises, he was relatively unharmed. "He's incredibly lucky," the ER doctor told Rachel and Daniel. "Another few hours in those temperatures, without shelter." She didn't finish the thought. "He had shelter," Rachel said, looking through the window at Scout, who sat in the hallway outside Ethan's room. Hospital policy didn't allow dogs inside, but the staff had agreed to let Scout stay nearby, understanding that separating the dog from the boy would cause more distress. Scout took care of him. Over the following days, as Ethan recovered and the story spread, animal behavior experts weighed in. Border collies, they explained, were bred for centuries to protect their charges. Scout's behavior, staying with Ethan, keeping him warm, finding a sheltered spot, and then leading searchers to him, was consistent with the breed's deep-seated herding and protective instincts. But to Rachel and Daniel, it was more than instinct. It was love. Scout had done what they couldn't. She'd kept their son alive through a cold mountain night, never leaving him, never giving up. Ethan spent 3 days in the hospital. During that time, Scout remained either in the parking lot with Daniel or in the hallway outside his room. When Ethan was finally discharged, the reunion between boy and dog was profound. Scout's entire body wagged as Ethan, wrapped in blankets and held in his father's arms, was brought out to the car. The boy's hand immediately reached for the dog, and a sound emerged from his lips. Scout, clear and unmistakable. It was the first time Ethan had ever spoken his dog's name, the first time he'd ever purposefully called to anyone. Rachel and Daniel stood frozen, staring at their son. "Did he just—" Daniel started. "Scout," Ethan said again, and the dog pressed against him, her tail moving in slow, gentle sweeps, as if she understood the magnitude of the moment. Rachel knelt down beside them, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "That's Scout. She saved you. She brought you home." The ride home was quiet, everyone processing what had happened, how close they'd come to losing everything. The house felt different somehow, both foreign and achingly familiar. Rachel couldn't look at the back door without seeing it standing open, couldn't walk into the backyard without remembering those first terrible moments of searching. But Ethan seemed remarkably resilient. He was tired, still recovering, but not traumatized in the way Rachel had feared. He stayed close to Scout, and the dog remained his constant companion, even more attentive than before if that was possible. The story made national news. Border Collie saves Autistic boy lost in National Forest ran in papers across the country. Interview requests poured in, but Rachel and Daniel declined most of them, wanting to protect Ethan's privacy, wanting to return to some semblance of normal life. They did agree to one local interview, partly to thank the community that had searched so tirelessly. The reporter, a woman named Jennifer from the Asheville Citizen-Times, was respectful and gentle in her questions. She sat in their living room, Ethan on the floor nearby with Scout, arranging his pine cones in their precise lines. "What went through your mind when you realized he was gone?" Jennifer asked Rachel. Rachel took a breath, remembering. Every worst fear a parent can have. But underneath all that terror was this one thought that kept repeating. Scout is with him. Scout won't let anything happen to him. I didn't know if it was true, if a dog could really protect a child in the wilderness, but I needed to believe it. And she did, Jennifer said, watching Scout, who lay with her head on Ethan's leg. She absolutely did. Daniel spoke up, his voice rough with emotion even now, weeks later. The search teams covered miles of forest. We had volunteers, tracking dogs, helicopters, infrared cameras. But it was Scout who kept him alive and Scout who led us to him. She's not a trained service dog. She didn't have any special certification. She just loved our son and knew he needed her. "Will you get her certified now?" Jennifer asked. "Actually, yes," Rachel said. "We've been in contact with an organization that trains service dogs for children with autism. They want to use Scout as an example for their program, show what's possible when the bond between dog and child is this strong. And we're going to work with them to ensure Scout has the training to continue helping Ethan." The interview appeared the following Sunday, accompanied by a photograph of Ethan and Scout that Daniel had taken in the backyard. In it, Ethan's hand rested on Scout's head, and the dog looked up at him with those intelligent amber eyes, alert and protective. Life slowly returned to a new normal. The back door was fixed with a lock that required a key to open. Alarms were installed on all exterior doors. Rachel and Daniel enrolled in a wilderness first aid course. They created protocols, backup plans, safety measures. But underneath all the practical preparations was an understanding that had crystallized during those terrible hours. They couldn't control everything, couldn't prevent every danger, couldn't protect Ethan from every threat. But Scout could be there when they couldn't. Scout would stay by his side when they failed to watch him for 3 minutes. Scout would keep him warm when the mountain cold tried to claim him. 3 months after the incident, Rachel stood at the kitchen window again, watching Ethan in the backyard. He sat cross-legged on the grass, his hands moving in repetitive patterns as he arranged pine cones in a precise line. Beside him, Scout lay in her characteristic crouch position, her black and white head resting on her paws, amber eyes fixed on the boy with unwavering attention. It looked exactly as it had that terrible morning, and yet everything had changed. Rachel understood now what she'd somehow known but never fully appreciated. This dog, this remarkable animal, loved her son with a devotion that transcended training or instinct. Scout had chosen Ethan, had bonded with him in a way that went beyond what any textbook on animal behavior could explain. Daniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," Rachel said, and meant it. "I'm okay." She turned to face him. I keep thinking about that night, about how cold it was, how scared he must have been. And then I think about Scout, just staying with him, not trying to run home for help like in the movies. Just staying, keeping him warm, waiting for us to find them. Border collies are bred to stay with their flock, Daniel said, but his voice carried the same awe Rachel felt. But this was more than breeding. This was choice. Through the window, they watched as Ethan's hand reached out to touch Scout's ear, a gesture he'd repeated countless times since coming home. The dog's tail moved in a slow wag, but she didn't otherwise move, content to be touched, to be there, to be whatever Ethan needed her to be. I don't think I ever thanked her, Rachel said suddenly. Not properly, not in a way she'd understand. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Rachel made Scout's favorite meal, grilled chicken mixed with her regular food, topped with a scrambled egg. She set the bowl down and then knelt beside the dog, taking Scout's face gently in her hands. Thank you, Rachel whispered, looking into those amber eyes. Thank you for bringing him home. Thank you for loving him. Thank you for being here. Scout's tail wagged slowly, and she leaned forward to lick Rachel's face, a gentle gesture of affection. Then she turned back to Ethan, who had come inside for dinner, resuming her post beside him as he ate. The months turned into a year, and then 2. Ethan continued to develop, his language skills slowly emerging, supported by therapy and the constant calming presence of Scout. He still struggled with many things: social situations, changes in routine, sensory overload. But he had his words now, more of them all the time, and his first full sentence, spoken on his 9th birthday, was, "Scout is my best friend." The autism community in Asheville and beyond heard their story and reached out. Rachel and Daniel found themselves becoming advocates, speaking at conferences about the role of service dogs, sharing their experience, offering hope to other families who felt overwhelmed and isolated. Scout, meanwhile, remained unchanged by the attention. She had never wanted anything but to be near Ethan, to protect him, to love him. The dog who had kept a little boy alive through a cold mountain night asked for nothing in return, content with the simple pleasure of lying at his feet, of following him through the house, of being his constant companion.